Hey, welcome back. Blue tape is not just for masking, right? Let me show you lots of ways I use it in my shop. So here I'm drilling some holes in some aluminum, and I want those to be centered. You can see that they're a little bit off. And in this application, it's really not critical, but if I can do something that's easy and I don't have to move the fence, that's what I'll do with blue tape. So by adding a couple of pieces of blue tape, that's about 1/8 thou, I've scooted that over, and now I am really close. Some of you may recognize this accessory for the Festool domino machines. It's the Seneca Dock Plate XL. But in my opinion, it's a little slippy. Too much sliption. Let's give it some gription with some sandpaper. Super easy to do. Of course, blue tape excels for this. And now let's see this thing in action and the difference that it makes. Yeah, man. So much better. Okay, so this panel is just about fit. I have a little bit of a gap right here. You probably can't see it, but I'm just going to put a mark. So I'll just lightly hit this area. This end over here looks pretty good. So we're getting close. Let me hit this area real quick. As I get close, I'll put a small bevel with a block plane. So I just barely have this tiny little sliver of MDF and veneer to sand. So it makes it happen quicker, right? And right here I had a gap, so I don't want to sand there. Gap got smaller and we're about ready to drop in. Yeah. Fragile. Now, I don't remember exactly what I was doing here. I remember I goofed on the panel and I had to repair that. That's why I'm gluing a veneer after this frame is made. And I made the cuts at the sliding table saw. This allowed me to add blue tape to the crosscut fence and to sneak up on a perfect fit for any tiny out of squareness. Of course, this could also be done with a crosscut sled. I sometimes forget how well that easy tack holds. There we go. And I had put an X here, and that's going to go in. Got a little mishap there, but I can take care of that as well. So I think we're there. Just don't want to push it in. Yeah? That's how you do it. Then I added some more blue tape, glued the veneer in place. This was the back of the door. I don't have shots of it, but here's the finished project. This is all solid wood cherry frames with figured cherry veneer. Beautiful. I love this shop-made handle. I will leave a link in the description on exactly how I make these. Now here, I've made a cut and I want that round over to not leave any flat spot, right? So I can check that. There's a little bit of gap on the outfeed side, but rather than moving this fence, I can move that fence in or out. We'll just add some tape. Now, I should mention this early in the video. So I know that this tape is about 4 thousandths. So that's, I believe, like 1/10 of a millimeter. I can put 2 layers here to create that offset. And I don't have to move the fence. Super easy, right? Very simple. And always measurable because I know that that tape is like the thickness of a sheet of paper. And I utilize those dimensions all the time when I'm using it as a spacer, essentially. Yeah. So it works very similar to a joiner. And we can check that. So probably hard to see on camera, but there's a tiny little gap underneath that straight edge. Thickness of, 2 pieces of tape. Could not be easier. I have zero affiliation with microjig, but I love these things for parts like this. You can see how I run it vertical and then horizontal. And then we would notch this part out at the table saw. Boom, just like that, shop-made handles. Check out the video, more information there. Super easy. They're very ergonomic. I love them. All right, at the ends of these handles, I will sometimes round it or angle it. Here I'm doing an angled cut, but I want that cut to end right where the radius ends. And I needed to move that stop just a little bit, but instead of moving the stop, blue tape, right? I mean, I can't move that fence effectively, just, those few thousandths. But blue tape, man, that stuff works. I'm using it all the time. And boom, just like that, that cut is perfectly where I want it. So, whilst I was editing this video, I noticed this little bit of blue tape on my adjustment. That has an adjustment screw to adjust the saw 90 degrees. Well, turning that bolt is hit or miss, but I know a piece of blue tape will give me exactly what I need. Yeah, man, 101 uses. All right, so I'm making these drawer fronts / handles to fit these pieces. This will end up being a blade storage box. Let's see, this will go like that, okay? And so I'm just creating this rebate or this rabbet on the bottom of the handle that corresponds with this thing. I took a router and had a bunch of these, so I was able to gang a 3/8 round over to create these radiuses to match these radiuses, cutting everything to fit. But I've noticed that the rebate here on this that show up is just a little bit too long. You can see it moving back and forth. Now this distance here is exactly the same as this distance. So it would be kind of tricky to move each one of these stop blocks in the amount that I want. So I know that 4 pieces of blue tape, is a 64th, which is about what I need to move over. So I can simply just add a couple of pieces to each side. A lot easier than trying to move both of those stop blocks, right? Boom. I can run. My next ones will be accurate. So, yeah, very effective. This guy needs a bigger hammer. All right, so you should never have to hammer a tongue and groove or a tenon into a mortise, right? It's just too tight. Let's see what we can do. All right, here I'm cutting some grooves and some tongues to make some drawers and door fronts. Easy way to do it on a table saw. Now, if you're not comfortable watching me do this or you don't want to do it like this, it's simple. Don't do it. I find this very effective. I don't see any issues. All right, let's test the fit. Looks to be a little tight, right? We don't want to force that. But instead of moving the fence, I'm just going to remove the fence and we'll apply a couple of strips of blue tape. Since I'm cutting from both sides, this will effectively make that tongue or the tenon part 8 thousandths thinner. Let's mark that just to keep track of how things are going. Now, these are just samples. Let's give that a go. So the blue tape proved to be the exact thickness or the amount that I needed to remove. So many uses. All right, here's something a little different. I'm using my shooting board and shooting plane to fine tune this drawer front, and I'll show you that here in a bit. Something's out of square a little bit. Doesn't matter to me. I just need it to fit. So I can add a few layers of blue tape. I have these folded and I have them numbered, whether they're 2 layers, 3, 4, all the way up to 7 layers, I believe. They're essentially spacers. And I'm also back beveling the end by using that shim at the shooting board. This will make more sense here. I want this to look like a rail on a cabinet, but in fact, it'll be a drawer front. That's why I want those ends angled so they engage easier in the opening. And here we are a bit later after everything's been lacquered. I can add a piece of tape on each end for clearance and chunk of Formica for clearance underneath. That's about 30 thou. Put the drawer front in place. I've added a couple of screws protruding through the drawer box, and that will make a couple of dimples in the back side of the drawer front. This was a super fun build and something that I use all the time. I added a little bit of a pull here. This thing extends out to about 30 inches. I can put a platform. I did make a video on this, so if you want to see this Pantorouter cart, I will leave a link in the description. So here at my drill press, I drill hundreds of these. These are the front for my DF500 dock. And this goes in here, and I'll drill one hole, slide it over, drill the other. Well, I needed to fine tune the distance in from this edge so that it would be the same. And again, tape. I can do as many layers as I need to build that up to fractionally move that over by a few thousandths if I want. So another awesome reason to use tape. This isn't blue, but it works the same. So I'm making a new jig and I want two pieces to engage each other with just a little bit of slack. This will make more sense here in a bit. So I start by making a rip, then I cut that in half, and then I'll add blue tape to one of those pieces. Then the one with the blue tape, I'll rip it again, and just like that, it's a few thou under. All right, so here's the strips that I cut, and these are the ones I had blue tape, so they're slightly smaller. And with that, this piece engages on there. So this jig is multifunctional. As I'm creating these docks for the DF500, this guy slips into place. Hold it with a clamp. This particular model is made of two pieces, or two sub-assemblies, I should say. They get lacquered at different times. Each sub-assembly gets lacquered, and of course I don't want lacquer in this part, so I can utilize this little spacer which moves the tape over about 1/16 of an inch. The tape is 1/2 inch, which is standard, and this material is 5/8 or a little bit under, so I'm centering the tape in this component. Then I can add one of these dudes. Get a little index mark for my stop. And then that dude is ready for lacquer. This sub-assembly, these get lacquered, and then these will go on here. So once this is lacquered, of course this tape would come off, leaving two raw areas there. Then this jig, these will slip off. This goes in here. This goes in this cradle again. I can hold this in place with a clamp. This goes in place, gets pre-drilled. Add a little bit of glue, then add the screws, and I end up with that. So the little spacer I tacked in place in the last video, I make those by utilizing all my scrap Baltic birch fall off. I can use tape on one end of all those long pieces and then gang cut them here at the chop saw 4 or 5 at a time. It's pretty effective, and I'll just fill this box all the way to the top.
So I'm drilling some holes in the bottom of this table saw insert. I'm going to add some magnets, and my target dimension was 1/8 inch, 0.125. Well, I was a little bit shallow, and so I need to go a little bit deeper, but to adjust this drill press is a little bit tricky. I wouldn't be able to sneak up on another. I needed about 8 thousandths. So a simple solution is just to add 2 pieces of tape, and I'm now 127 thousandths, just about right, to slip in an 1/8 inch magnet. All right, I'm gonna start cutting the miters on this box, and I've done a couple of things. I've taken a square, put it here, and it literally took only 1 piece of tape to put here, and so that's about 4 thousandths, 3.5 thousandths to make this dead on square. Same here, over here it was square. I'm using a light behind the square, viewing it from here, and I can make sure that that is dead on square, right? This old DeWalt saw is pretty accurate. And then this is the outside of the box. This is gonna get a miter like this. I like cutting my miters this way rather than this being the outside of the box and cutting the miter this way. In this situation, for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that I believe the wood fibers are cut cleaner cutting this way. Remember, this is my outside. So I'm favoring the grain and the fibers of the wood. Think in terms of a paintbrush. That was my buddy David Bedrosian's analogy. A paintbrush as related to the wood fibers being cut. They're in favor of that blade direction. As opposed to cutting like this, all these wood fibers are cutting into them. So anyway, I like cutting it like that. I've set up a stop and a spacer here so I can move the spacer out of the way. I can bring this right up to that. I'm going to cut right at that corner, and I can clamp this to make sure that this piece doesn't move. Then I can remove the spacer so I don't cut the corner off, and I can make that cut. This saw is barely cutting this dimensions, about 5 3/4, I believe. And I had to temporarily hold my guard up and out of the way. This top edge of the board ends up bottoming out on this aluminum housing. So I couldn't cut it the other way. The motor would definitely hit, but this is working well. Check it out.
And yeah, there are a lot of ways to cut miters. Perhaps using a crosscut sled with a table saw would be a better choice. But hey, if you're using a chop saw, you want to micro adjust that fence. Blue tape is a super easy way to make it very accurate.
Yeah, it's a little scary with the blade exposed like that. I stand off to the side, and hey, if you don't want to do this, absolutely don't do it. To me, I'm just paying attention, and it's fine. A couple of things. You can see just a tiny little bit down at the bottom that doesn't get cut. I think you can see that. But that'll get cleaned up because I'm going to hit these with a shooting board and a shooting plane. And you can see this is a newly sharpened blade. It's a ATB grind, which I like for doing fine work like this. I believe it's a 96 tooth. This is a 12 inch and almost 0 saw mark. So it's a pretty clean cut. Of course, it's going to be clean on this side. And you can see that this other side is also perfectly clean. So that's going to make a good cut. I mean, that's going to make a good miter. And that looks to be a little out of square for whatever reason. But we're going to be hitting this with a shooting board and a shooting plane anyway. So it's a good place to start.
All right, and here's the finished piece. It was an urn for some good people. Not the best shots, but it certainly shows beautiful, tight miters.
So I'm making this curved jig to where I can take these wood pieces and make them flush with these curved components. And so I'm just, you see this curved jig with a couple of cleats, right? And I can do both sides with the same jig. In other words, here and here, they'll clamp down. Like, wow. And I'll utilize a bit like this to get everything flush. Well, this piece was just a little bit short. Rather than cutting a new one, 2 pieces of tape, right? Literally the thickness of 2 sheets of paper, and I'm dead flush. Yeah, love it.
Those curved components turned into these drawer fronts for the pivoting drawers. If you haven't seen this video, do me a huge favor. Check it out. I'll leave a link in the description. Decades ago, when I first started working with veneer, I was using loads of veneer tape. But I discovered blue tape and I've never looked back. I find it so much easier to work with. I don't need to leave it on in the vacuum bag since I glue my seams, and it's so much easier to remove. And oh yeah, creating tabs the easy way. So I'm working on a new prototype for something. You'll see it soon. Anyway, my target dimension is a 1/2 inch deep. I'm going to be adding some magnets. And so I set it up with the drill press as close as I can. And actually, soon I will be getting a new drill press with a DRO. I cannot wait for something so precise. All right, so it looks a little shallow. I will just add some blue tape, right? In my world, 4 layers of blue tape is about a 1/64 of an inch, or about 15 thou. That'll get me closer. Check it out. Yeah, man. 0.5, 1/2 inch, that'll work. And here are my numbered shims. I use these all the time. Of course, those numbers correspond to the layers or thicknesses of the blue tape. Yeah, that's what I call stupid simple. Cutting some box joints, and here I have a sample, and obviously too loose. Yeah. So let's make an adjustment. I need to move my stop. So I'll take this block with sandpaper, and I'm going to clamp that in place. That's my reference, right? So what I have here, yeah, more blue tape. Let me mark this. So yeah, 2 layers. So I can slip that in between the sandpaper block and my stop, right? I'll clamp the sandpaper block in place, remove the tape, and then shift that block to the right. Or I could go the other way if it was too tight. I could put the sandpaper block in place, clamp it, loosen the stop, add the blue tape, and then reclamp the stop and remove the sandpaper block. Such an effective way to move just a minuscule amount and know exactly how much you're moving it. And just like that, a perfectly fitting little pile of box joints. Here I'm adding a lid to a box, right? And even though the lid and the box have attracting magnets, I want that lid to index centered. The magnets will just get it close. I want it to be centered. So I'm going to add a couple of small cleats. So I assumed that tape thickness on each side and the ends would give me just enough slack. All right, let's see how we did. That seems just about right. It engages correctly. I like it. These were for a couple of boxes that I made. Box joints were on the sliding tray, right? And oh yeah, magnets, man. The fronts of my domino docks, both the XL700 and the DF500 shown here, they get this little wooden medallion, right? And so I just use a router to plunge a cavity for them, and I like them to turn out dead on flush. And I know what you're thinking, why not just use a Fortuner bit? Well, because that plywood, it's all different thicknesses. Slight difference from sheet to sheet or even within the same sheet, which means when I use a drill press, the cavities will be either too deep or too shallow. Here, I'm just a tad too deep, so I'm going to add 2 layers of blue tape. So yeah, at a drill press, I would be indexing off the back. Here, I'm indexing off the front or the top. And since I have 20 routers, I can leave this dude set up. 20 routers. Do I sound braggy? All right, so here I am cutting a runner for some T-track, and it was a little bit tight. So a couple of layers of tape, and I can sneak up on an absolute perfect fit. This is phenolic. It is super hard, but it doesn't move and expand like a wood runner would. A wood runner would? All right, let's see how this fits. And that feels just about right. I cut this piece to length, and then I will epoxy it into place. Or maybe I won't need to. All right, that was a perfect fit. Now, what's this for? Well, let me show you. I drilled a compound angled hole in this block of wood, and now I can sharpen my high-speed steel countersinks quickly and easily with like maybe 320 grit on my belt sander. It works amazingly well.
So in general, carbide is harder and will last longer, but high-speed steel can hold a finer edge. You can make it sharper. Here you can see that I just kissed the end of that drill bit on all 4 of those flutes. This chip out near the edge, that's what I'm trying to avoid. And now with this drill press running at about 2200 RPMs, everything's turning out beautifully. Awesome. Yeah, man. I love it.
And of course, we can't leave out the proverbial task for blue tape, right? And that is going to be it for this video. I sincerely hope you got some good use out of it. And so next time you're in your shop, think of the endless possibilities that you can do with blue tape. All right, I'm out of here. I thank you. I appreciate you. And I'll see you on the next one.